So my name's Catherine Elwin. I'm the Senior Coroner's Officer, Coroner's Service Manager for Teesside and Hartlepool.
I'm Coroner Bailey. I'm the Senior Coroner for Teesside and Hartlepool Coroner Service. I think a lot of people think the coroner undertakes the actual post-mortem examination, and we don't. The coroner is a judge and sits in court, listens to evidence and makes judicial decisions. The coroner also is in charge of the actual investigation, so before the inquest gets to court, the coroner will direct what evidence is required, and then the coroner's officers will collate that. On the bigger inquests, we may need to have a pre-inquest review, whereby after the inquest has been opened, we'll then set a date to be able to see what evidence is there, and we'll determine who the interested persons are.
The Coroner's Service is an independent judicial function, which is to investigate deaths that are reportable to the service under the Coroners and Justice Act. And the coroner's officers work within that service under the direction and control of the coroner. So what their role is to act as investigators for the coroner.
There are different inquests in the sense that a very straightforward inquest might be held as documentary, and in that case we don't have to have any witnesses come to court to give evidence. It's basically us taking the family through the evidence that is being gathered, and the family are entitled to see the evidence before the inquest is set, so that they can then tell us if there's anything that they have concerns with or that they would like us to know. Those inquests usually last about 15 minutes to half an hour. The family can expect to be given a voice, whether that's a member of their own family or whether they have legal representation, and they will be listened to, but they have to understand that the scope of the inquest can be very narrow. And as I mentioned earlier, sometimes the family or other people want to be able to blame someone, and that isn't the purpose of the inquest. The scope of the inquest will be set by the coroner, having listened and heard heard submissions from the interested persons. And the interested persons are entitled to participate in the inquest, to see the evidence and ask questions. And the coroner will also determine who the interested persons are.
So gathering evidence, it depends on what the case is, but there are a range of organisations. So we obviously have independent witnesses, eyewitnesses, people who can give hearsay accounts, families. With some of the larger organisations, medical trusts, mental health trusts, prisons, doctors, ambulance service, police, local authority establishments, care homes. So it all depends on what the death is, what's involved, because we're looking at to assist the coroner to answer 4 questions: who died, when they died, where they died, and how they came about their death. So it depends on who they are, where they were when they passed away, how they came about their death, as to which establishment we would be liaising with. And it's more that we are investigating and interviewing and gathering evidence from them, rather than it being a liaison with them.
In respect of evidence from families, the most helpful thing would be if they're able to give us a statement setting out how their loved one was presenting or behaving in the weeks or months before they passed away, particularly if suicide is suspected. And the reason we ask for that is because there is a legal test for suicide, and that essentially is twofold. Firstly, the coroner must determine whether the deceased intended to take their own life, and secondly, if they, having made that decision, took deliberate action to take their own life. So the information here will come essentially from the family or the loved ones left behind, because they obviously knew the deceased much better than I would know, or whichever coroner sits on the inquest. So we will be guided by the family in that respect as to how the deceased was presenting, what their frame of mind was, whether they made any communication with other people, for example, WhatsApp, written notes, emails, etc. So anything that the family can help provide us with in that regard is always enormously helpful. The coroner will have listened to all of the evidence in the case, including from the family and any of the witnesses who attended. Then the coroner must sum up the evidence that they accept and make findings on controversial or contentious issues. And it may be that the coroner makes a decision that some members of the family or others aren't happy with, but ultimately it is the coroner's decision as to the factual findings. And based on those factual findings, the coroner will then apply any legal test that is appropriate to this particular conclusion that is appropriate. So, for example, the suicide test, if it is a case of suicide, and the coroner will consider what evidence is available to support or go against such a conclusion, and then ultimately, having considered the evidence, considered the legal test, the coroner will give a conclusion.
So families who are involved in an inquest, the coroner's officer would be the main contact point to liaise with them throughout the process. However, from an inquest point of view, we do have Coroner's Court Support Service, which is an independent organisation made up of volunteers who will assist the families throughout the day of the inquest to give them advice and comfort and support. However, the coroner's officer in this area in particular is at court as well, and it will be the coroner's officer who they've been liaising with throughout the case. So that coroner's officer would have contact with them to advise them when the case is going to be heard. They will meet and greet them at the actual hearing and take them through how the process is going to run, then speak to them at the end should they have any further questions. The other things that we can do as well is if somebody's particularly nervous about coming to court, the coroner's officer will talk them through what the process and the hearing is going to be. But we do also, on occasions, offer a visit to that court so they can have a look at the surroundings before the case actually goes ahead. So my advice would be to any families who are attending court is to link in with their designated coroner's officer who they should have already had contact with, discuss the remit and the purpose of the inquest so that they fully understand and are aware of what questions will be answered, what questions they will be able to ask.